again. I know there can be too much of a good thing, but it's me again. But when I thought about that, there actually can be too much of a good thing. And I thought about that because Purim, as we have been talking about, is being celebrated right now. And it's a really good example of that there can be too much of a good thing. And if you read the Megillah as an adult, as you should, you will see what I mean. I'm going to be real honest here, so buckle in. Ahasuerus, king of Persia, is a drunk. The Megillah tells us that he often had parties that lasted 6 months. These lavish parties were overflowing with food and liquor. In fact, the Megillah tells us there were no restrictions on drinking. The king instructed all of his advisors to do according to each man's desires. I want you to imagine this scene. The king is displaying all of his riches to his guests. We hear there are purple curtains, alabaster columns, gold and silver couches, mother of pearl, and the list goes on. I want you to imagine kind of the most gaudy house you've ever seen on Zillow or the MLS, and then multiply it by 10. And then fill it with an innumerable amount of drunk people. A few days into one of those parties, Ahasuerus wanted Vashti, his queen, to come dance for him. She had been entertaining the ladies at a separate party. But here's the catch. He invited her to dance in her crown. Our rabbis interpret that to mean that she was invited to dance in only her crown. Vashti told the eunuchs in charge of going between her and the king to report her refusal. And, lest I forget to tell you, the entire palace is overflowing with eunuchs. Anyway, the king is consumed with rage at the very notion that anyone will refuse him, so he gathered his advisors, officials, and a gaggle of eunuchs to find out what to do. This is just the first of many decisions that the king will farm out, and that is how we eventually get into trouble. Long story short, Vashti gets expelled. All the women in the kingdom are told by edict to respect and obey their husbands, and the great king of Persia reveals through this edict that he is actually afraid of women. But Vashti is not a villain, she's a hero, and yet she persisted, reclaiming my time. No is a full sentence. Apparently, too much independent thinking by women is bad for the kingdom. But back to the story. We have already learned that too much drinking leads already foolish people and kings to do foolish things. But Ahasuerus' foolishness only continues. His servants suggest a beauty pageant, including, and this is in the Megillah, attractive women only. Enter Esther, or actually Hadassah. Hadassah was her real name. Her name was changed, and she's not Mordecai is not her cousin, making her Mordecai's niece. They are cousins. I said that wrong. Mordecai is not her uncle. They're cousins. But again, you only know that if you read very slowly and very closely. What the Megillah gets into next can only be described as something akin to a peek into a harem. When you read that section, if you think the text as hinting at something X-rated, you are right. It involves all the women marinating in oils and perfumes for a year. Talk about too much of a good thing. Once they are properly marinated, they go to the king for their audition. And I'm not going to explain what happens next because honestly, it's not appropriate for Shabbat and there are children here. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, read the book again. Fast forward, Esther wins the contest. The king throws another bash. Fast forward, we meet Haman, and Haman tells the king, we have to destroy these people who live among us. Haman didn't appreciate that there were a lot of us, and we do our own thing. Sound familiar? What was our sin in Egypt that we were enslaved for? The Pharaoh said, there are too many of us, and we do our own thing. And what was our sin in Persia that almost got us killed? There are too many of us, and we do our own thing. Foolish, lovesick, and probably drunk Ahasuerus hands over his signet ring to Haman and says, do with them what you wish. His ring was his signature, and in that one act, he handed over power to Haman and sealed our destruction. Haman was given too much power without any checks and balances. Not a good thing for the Jews. It's never a good thing for the Jews when power is consolidated into one place or person. Now, Ahasuerus may have been more of a party animal than a politician, but as far as we know, he wasn't dangerous. But he ceded his authority without asking questions and without caring who might be getting hurt. And we know how the next parts go. But do you remember our Purim skit during COVID? Anyone remember the puppets? That was one of my favorites. Don't talk about what happens at the end of the book. It's because at the end, though the Jewish people are saved and go on to exchange yummy packages of treats, mishloach manot, they also slaughter tens of thousands of people. There really shouldn't have been any bloodshed at all. Perhaps they felt they were still in danger of being eradicated, but even so, even in war, responses should be measured. There should never ever be too much when it comes to slaughtering people who are usually, although not always, innocent. This wouldn't have come to pass had a despot not come into power in the first place, had people around the king and Haman done what was right. But Ahasuerus was asleep at the wheel, or more probably drunk, and Haman was not encumbered by decent people or strong guardrails. It just reminds us that speaking up to power matters, calling out bad leadership matters, and not acting because it doesn't affect you is unacceptable. Haman has popped up many times over the century, and often the Jews are immediate targets. Why? Because there are too many of us and we do our own thing. It sounds preposterous considering how few of us there are in the world, but suspicion and rumor are powerful like wine and can make people do things they might otherwise not do. And Esther was a hero, yes, but the spotlight on her dims the stories of the others, and really they should be highlighted as well. Vashti for not allowing herself to be abused and humiliated. Mordecai for refusing to bow and helping Esther come up with a plan to save the Jewish people. And Esther herself, of course, for the courage to carry out that plan. Haman and Esther are easy to see and elevate, but how often do we miss the Mordecais and the Hamans? The ones working day and night making sure that the guardrails stay intact, keeping those who should not be in power just out of reach of the levers of power. Or the ones planning and boasting about destroying whatever part of the government or population they just don't like. Haman didn't look like a terrifying villain. We have to remember he was just a man. The Book of Esther is a complicated one for sure, but it holds within it important warnings about excess. Too much drinking alters our judgment and impedes it entirely. Too much canoodling does the same. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. But there's nothing new under the sun. Haman is alive and well today. I will let you decide for yourself who Haman is and just how many of them there are. Even though the Jewish people are only about 15 million strong, spread all over the planet, people are looking around and saying, today, there are too many of us, and they do their own thing. There aren't enough of us to assume someone else will defend us, that someone else will save us. Only we can save ourselves. No one Mordecai or one Esther is going to do it this time. So when you come to our adult Purim spiel on Saturday night, feel free to fulfill your mitzvah of getting so drunk you cannot tell the difference between Mordecai and Haman. Just please don't drive home. And then after you recover from what should be a pretty good hangover, decide what you are going to do to fight Haman, whoever Haman is to you. Because like Egypt with Moses and Aaron, and Persia with Esther and Mordecai, our survival might actually hinge on what one or two people do. And so, to close and to get ready for tomorrow night, I'm going to say Haman, and you're going to do what you know you're supposed to do, okay? Haman! Shabbat shalom.